Welcome to the Plague Hive. I'm once again joined by Oli, aka Archon Altars, and Colin, aka Kitterfox, and today we have a bit of a special deck for you. This video is for all of you out there who are new to the game, getting interested in playing Uzuri and wondering where to start, because while it is a very fun deck to play, it is not a cheap deck. In fact, I'd say it's currently one of the most expensive decks in the game to build if you want to run the full thing with all of the cards in there, because it runs a couple of the expensive staples like Command and Conquer, Enlightened Strike, Fyendal Spring Tunic, all of those, and they're very expensive to buy. For that reason, we are bringing you a budget deck tech today, along with an upgrade path to flesh out the deck piece by piece should you decide you like the style and want to continue improving it. We had two main requirements when we were trying to come up with a list. It should be as close to a full power Uzuri list as possible in style and the cards you run, and the final list should end up under $100/euros. As always, the deck list, including the matchups, will be down in the description of the video. So without further ado, let's get into the deck. And here we have it. Uzuri Switchblade, obviously, and we've exchanged a bunch of the cards you would normally see in a deck like this for cheaper budget options. So guys, why don't you go over the deck and try to explain why we decided to bring these budget replacements in and what the general idea that the deck is trying to do is.
Well, first off, we should probably go over the hero first. That's probably the most important part. Uzuri Switchblade, pretty simple hero now. If you play a stealth card and you activate Uzuri Switchblade, you can banish any card from your hand. And when she resolves, if it's a card with power 2 or less, you put the stealth card you're playing onto the bottom of your deck and place it with the card that you banished. It's really sick ability, unless you get past a lot of requirements that require you to play from a specific zone, like Death Touch, and activates her specialization, being Shakedown. And it's just a really tricky ability for your opponents to guess, since it could be a threat like Shakedown, or it could just be, who knows, Agnesia, which does almost nothing half the time.
Yep.
But let's get into the cards.
Right.
Or more specifically, our equipment.
So we got like Heart and Cross Strap. I think it's an obvious downgrade from Tunic, but it's probably our best replacement. Lets us play any card for free, basically, minus last ditch effort. But Tunic lets you do that with, like, it's generally your Tunic players are using Death Touch from Arsenal on like a 0 card hand anyway. So this still allows you to do that once. The Blossom Tunic, the one-use version, it does the same thing as well, but at least Heart and Cross Strap, you could have anything in Arsenal to a 0 card hand.
Yep. And this kind of lines up with what Uzuri wants to play anyways, right? Because the restriction says cost 2 or less. And so we're trying to include as many cards that fit that requirement anyways. And then Heart and Cross Strap just kind of synergizes with that a little bit.
Yeah. And then we got Mask of Perdition, because your other choices are probably Crown of Providence, which is a lot more expensive. It's a $5 card, right? But it also works very well in the contract deck. It's like your main key piece. It works on budget and it works very effectively. Crown of Providence works better in like red line and blue line decks.
So this card is actually kind of the reason why we decided to go with a contract version of Uzuri specifically, just because you have this headpiece that allows you to have sort of a part of this typical assassin gameplay, right? Where you generate silver and then you can cash that silver in to rebuy your equipment, which is something that is very unique to the class that nobody else can do. And you need contracts to generate that silver. And the other piece of equipment where you can do that, which would be the Black Tech Whisperers, the boots, are pretty expensive, whereas Mask of Perdition is just, it's a majestic, so you can pick it up relatively cheaply, and it's a neat little trick. Another option in the hat slot, if you're not particularly impressed with what Mask of Perdition does for you, for example, would be Hope Merchant's Hood, which just allows you to cycle out any cards from your hand for new ones, in case you just don't like what you drew. But we think in this specific iteration of the deck, Mask of Perdition is your best option. It also blocks one, potentially several times per game. It's just a good card.
Next up, we have the boots, being our Snapdragon Scalers. If you've played any aggro deck, you know what this does. It's a really simple card. Attack reaction, destroy it. Target attack with cost 1 or less gains skill again. This is really good for plays involving Death Touch, Leave No Witnesses, etc., etc. Or if you really want to be sneaky, you can use it on one of your stealth attacks to cheese in your actual threat on your next attack by baiting out your opponent's blocks on your first attack. Unfortunately, the loss you have with Snapdragon Scalers versus Black Text is you're losing the one block that Black Text does offer you, and it's a once per game action. So if you're using Snapdragons, you're going all in on this attack. And unfortunately, it can target your cards like Shakedown, which Black Text would target, but it's a great substitute on the budget. It's like a 10-cent card. It's great. I cannot sing its praises enough.
It also has like one extra upside over Black Text in that it doesn't require you to hit anything. So if the opponent just blocks 6 on your stealth card, like Colin said, you can just, activate the Snapdragons, give go again, and then you can come in with your Eradicate, you can come in with your Death Touch, your Leave No Witnesses, whatever you have lined up. And you can still actually play that despite your opponent having blocked the attack. With Black Text, you need to actually hit. So if they block 6, you can't activate your Black Text. And that can be crucial into a couple of matchups that can play pretty defensively, like Dash or a Dromai, for example. And then for the final piece, we have Toxic Tips. And what's the idea there, guys?
Iron Rod Plus.
Yeah, that's fair. So normally in this slot, you would probably see something like Flick Knives as the typical default assassin arms piece, which is also, to be honest, kind of like Iron Rod Plus, just that the plus is a little more impactful. But Toxic Tips can be some...
That's an understatement.
Yeah, fair. Toxic Tips, I think, it's pretty interesting because you can activate it and then come in with like a contract card and then have a cut to the chase to push that over the top. There's a couple of interesting things you can do with this. It's obviously not gonna, be the most amazing arms piece in the game, but it blocks 1, which can sometimes be all you need. And the upside can be surprisingly relevant in a couple of situations. All right, shall we go over the sideboard equipment pieces real quick before we head into the actual deck?
Of course.
So we got the daggers down here.
You got your normal dagger suite. We're running 3 daggers. We're not running the Scale Peeler since the one hero who it would be important against, Oldham, has finally left the format. So unless we're seeing Bravo with Titan's Fist and Rampart of the Ram's Head, I don't think we'll be worrying about Scale Peeler anytime soon. Mm-hmm. First dagger is a Scale Peeler. I'm sorry, Nerve Scalpel. The Nerve Scalpel is really simple. Once per turn action, 2 cost, attack with go again. This is true for all daggers. Again, the one thing that's also true for all the daggers is piercing 1. If it's defended by an equipment, it'll gain +1, which is really important as +1 and not the equipment gain -1 for things like Shred and other interactions like that. And the one thing that's special about all the daggers is they attack specific cards for blocking. In this case, any reaction cards, attack act reactions, or defense reactions. Very important distinction. Will gain -1 while defending if this hits. It's really costly, but all the daggers are really good in their own right.
Mm-hmm. It just depends on what you're up against, right? So you would run Nerve Scalpel, for example, against any deck that runs either a lot of attack reactions, so like a Dorinthia, or also against decks that run a lot of defense reactions, like a Riptide, for example, with a bunch of traps in the deck, right? And so you just run Nerve Scalpel, you run it preemptively. This deck doesn't have Flick Knives in it. So the trick where you flick a Nerve Scalpel in response to a defense reaction is not something you can do with this deck. But we do have Hurl in the sideboard, so you do have some ways to flick daggers to make something a little more spicy in some matchups, which might come up in some spots.
I think the best use of Nerve Scalpel is like with all your attacks are generally 0 for 4s anyway, so it's nice to have like forcing them to have a 2-card block against one of those is very good.
Yeah, you can lead with a Nerve Scalpel into a Leave No Witnesses, and then even if they have something like a Sink Below, they can't 1-card block it. They have to commit equipment, or they have to commit a 2nd card if they let the Nerve Scalpel hit. So that's a pretty neat interaction. Even if you don't have access to Flick Knives, this card still can do a lot of work for you. And then we got Orbitoclast, which does the same against non-attack actions. So this would be what you run into like wizards, for example, or you can also run this into Dromai. And then finally we have Spider's Bite, which hits attack actions. So you run this into any hero that runs a lot of attacks, like your Brutes. You can run this into Runeblade. A lot of heroes, basically. Most heroes in the game run a lot of attack actions, so Spider's Bite kind of hits most of the decks in the format. And then finally, for the equipment pieces, we've got our set of Arcane Barrier equipment. We've got Arcane Lantern for the matchups where you don't need 2 daggers and where you want some additional Arcane Barrier, so Runeblades mostly, and Wizards. Narune Gloves, Narune Hood. So we can run up to Arcane Barrier 3 against Kano or an Icelander, because the deck also has 17 blues in it, so you can actually fully utilize this large amount of Arcane Barrier. And that rounds out the equipment suite that we have access to. So let's start going over the deck itself, the cards in the deck.
So I think you've got like 3 different packages.
Mm-hmm.
You've got your swaps, you've got your contracts, and then you've got your stealths. Mm-hmm. And then you've got just extra spice cards of buffs and stuff. But generally you need, this is a contract build, so like we want our contracts to be quite high and be able to consistently mill decks. So we can have a look at those first.
Mm-hmm.
It's the core part. So you got your Annihilate the Arms. They banishes attack action cards. Hits most decks. It's pretty good. 1 for 5. It's not a clean block with a D-React or anything, so it's quite a nice card. And then you got your Leave No Witnesses, which is just an incredible card. It's a banish card, top deck and Arsenal, and get silver on red cards. Red cards are quite common, especially in aggro lists where almost all their attacks are red. And also just the banish off Arsenal is just like you have a little mini CNC.
Yeah, it's a good card. Like, you might look at the price of this card and be like, yeah, what is this doing in a budget deck video, right? Because it's definitely one of the more expensive cards that you have to buy if you want to make this deck. But we were thinking that you really can't cut this from the deck. Like, if you cut cards like Leave No Witnesses or Shakedown, which we're going to get to in a second, the deck just kind of doesn't work. You need some threats, you need some disruptive pieces. And unfortunately, most of those are printed at Majestic Rarity. So there's just, no way to really fully get around that. Otherwise, we'd be able to make a deck for like 20 or 30 bucks. And that's unfortunately not really possible with Assassin. So this is one of the cards where we just feel like there's absolutely no good budget replacement for it. So it has to stay in the deck no matter what.
But also it is like, Assassin has their own actual budget CNC.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So it's actually quite nice to have as within a budget.
We all know that Wreak Havoc does exist, but
exactly.
Target is so very specific that we thought that it shouldn't be included in the list.
Mm-hmm.
Not to mention the fact that it only blocks 2 in a list that wants to be defensive. It's just a lot of cons where Leave No Witnesses can kind of fill a role, but we did consider Wreak Havoc. It's just not the card for this list.
Mm-hmm.
And then we got Plunder the Pool, which is another 0/4 on hit. Banished, looking for 1 costs. A lot of decks are quite cheap to play at the moment, especially aggro decks. They like to be streamlined, like to pitching as little as possible, or 1 card just to play everything. So 1 cost, 0 costs. They're everywhere. Good card. It generates silver, lets you recur equipment like Mask.
Yep.
Then you got Eradicate as your last contract, and this card is very good, especially when you're in the fatigue states. It basically says if it hits, you lose a hand this game, which is very strong, especially when you got 3 of them, because that's potentially 3 hands. And if you can line up a double contract turn with Eradicate, you can also just be like a spike silver generation turn where you have like Plunder the Pool on the Eradicate, and all their deck is 1 or 0 costs, and it hits, you're generating so much silver.
Yep. It's like, it's a little bit deceptive, Eradicate, because a lot of the times people are not going to block it because it's not immediately disruptive, right? Like, it doesn't take a card from their arsenal the way Leave No Witnesses does. It doesn't take a card from the hand the way Shakedown does. It doesn't stop their turn in any way, but you will quickly find that if opponents don't block your Eradicates, they will just lose the game because they deck out before they can kill you.
You don't feel Eradicate's disruption until your next cycle. Really.
Yeah, exactly. But you will definitely feel it. So your opponents will quickly learn to respect Eradicate and start to block it. And then it's basically almost as disruptive as any other card because they have to deal with it in any way.
Mm-hmm. And if it hits a combo piece in one of their decks or something, or like their spike card, the value is it's hard to calculate. It's really good.
Yep. Okay, so we got the contracts. Maybe we can go over the stealth cards next. So those are pretty straightforward.
Stealth cards are simple enough. You got blue and yellow isolates. Stealth dominate. Nothing more great than swapping in a dominated stealth attack into one of your big threats like Death Touch or Shakedown. Just to dominate just helps push so much damage. Backstab. You can't really go wrong with Backstab. It's 1 for 3. It's a stealth card. Nothing more to say. Wither, same category, but it does have like minor on hit being a frailty token. Stealth aren't supposed to be impressive. They're supposed to be a piece of the puzzle where you say, this is what I'm going to use to get my big threat in. This is a backdoor. This is your Rogue's Passage if you play Magic.
Yeah.
I see it as like, they're kind of like gems, where you play it, you get its effect instead of pitching it. Because it's pitching it essentially anyway to the bottom of your deck. So Isolate is a gem that kind of, you play it, you give your next attack dominate. It's quite nice.
Yeah, I've actually made that like comparison myself, where Isolate is just like a gem that reads, if you pitch this to a card, the card gains dominate, which is, if that was an actual gem and it also blocked 3, everybody would be running it.
Yeah, it's crazy good.
It's pretty good, yeah. And otherwise, the text on them doesn't really matter that much. The great part is they do this job whether they're red or blue. So they kind of do double duty, right? They are your blue base, so you can pitch them away to do something, but you can also play them to activate your hero ability and swap into whatever threat it is that you want to use that turn. It's just great playing a hero where your blues are actually useful pieces for you, because for so many heroes, the blues are mostly just kind of, these are my resource cards, and ideally I can block with them, but you don't really like having them in your hand to play them out because they don't really do much in most cases. They're just kind of worse versions of cards you already run. And for Uzuri, actually, the blue stealth cards are great because they just do everything that you need them to do. So they're pretty good to run. If you feel like you want a little more of these stealth cards, you could try fitting like a red Isolate into the deck. It's a little less flexible because it's red, it doesn't pitch, but if you feel I want more dominate in this deck, you could run some red Isolates, or you could run a couple extra blue stealth cards. Like, this is something that you need to like play the deck for a little bit, figure out the ratios yourself, see what you like, what you want to end up with. We started with 12 of them in the deck because it feels like a good starting point where you can be fairly reliably have one of them in hand every turn and then just do your stuff from there. And then we have the swap cards. So the stuff that you want to swap in, you want to exchange your stealth cards for one of these with the Uzuri hero ability. So let's go over those first.
Yeah, well, on a budget, we haven't got a huge amount of choices. These generally are like your CNCs, and stuff. But we do have Amnesia. It targets a few heroes. It can stop Vincent from Runegate thing, and it can stop Prism from thinking that Herald's been put into Soul, or Luminaris giving it go again.
It can also stop Katsu from doing his combo.
Yep.
And yeah, the combos are turned off. So like, there's a few niche scenarios of it, but realistically it's a 6, and it has 3 block.
Yep.
If on an Isolate, you can get 3 damage through. It's quite nice. Does its job. Brutal Assault is the same thing, but it has no text.
That's not true. It has some very nice flavor text.
Sure, yes.
It is some of the best flavor text in Fab, though.
Yeah, but no, this is like, if you have them or you can source them, you can get them for cheap. This could be Nourishing Emptiness, for example. Would be
Nourishing,
a decent replacement.
Erase Face. It could be anything you really want to, like, if you really wanted to target a certain mana. But it's a 3 block, and you're not going to get many of those. Then you got Death Touch, and this is one of your best swaps. It's just on hit, create whatever token you want. Frailty, Inertia, Blood Rot. And all of these are very powerful, depending on matchups. It's also a one cost, so it's easy to play from Arsenal or just play in general. It's one of the best cards to use on a snap turn. You can do double Death Touch turns, which are really strong. It could be it's like a 1 for 8 at that point. And 2 1 for 8s is pretty strong.
What I will add about Death Touch is this is the only swap card I feel comfortable really playing in my arsenals, because if they block 6 on my stealth card, I'm like, cool, I can just arsenal this and I'll play it later on a turn where I can pay the 1 and play it from my arsenal, because it's really flexible in that way, and it still has on hit effect. It's just an amazing card all around.
Right.
And it was Shakedown.
Yep.
Spec, which is one of your best specs in the game, right? Just take a card from a hand. Obviously, it relies on guessing the correct pitch value. Red is always a good shout most times.
Yeah.
Everyone runs reds because reds are the best threats. Some decks run a bit more blue, like Icelander, Wizards, Guardians. Could be blue is a safer choice. Unless you know what's in their hand, always go for one of those safer choices. And this card is very good. Also, this can be just played naked and without a swap effect, and you can use like Mask, and it's still a threat even if you don't swap it. It's great.
Yeah, what I found, like most of the times, if you play a naked Shakedown and you have a reaction up like a Mask, right? They're mostly gonna block 6, so you don't even need to spend the Mask on it. They're just gonna block because they're like, okay, I'd rather block 6 and save the damage, right? And get 2 cards out of the way that I get to choose, rather than taking 6 damage and still losing a card that they get to choose. So it's like, it's a very good threat, whether it's face up or whether it's swapped in from, like, obviously, like the best way to do it is isolate into Shakedown, so they can only block it with 1 card and they're forced to have a defense reaction to cover it up. It's generally a good card. It's also one of the slightly more expensive cards on this list, but same reason as for Leave No Witnesses. The effect is so good that we felt it's necessary to include it in the deck. Also, it's actually her specialization, right? So what more reason do you need to run this? It's just an awesome card. And that rounds out the swaps. We've got one more in the sideboard here, which is Humble. And the reason that that's in the sideboard is mostly because it blocks 2, which just makes it a little less good in some matchups where you need to block a bunch. And then also the effect isn't relevant against all heroes in the game, right? So when this hits a hero, that hero loses all abilities until the end of their next turn, which, for example, is great against a Levia, where it's like, hey, she cannot turn off Blood Depth anymore, and she might take a bunch of damage, but it does nothing against Dash, for example, because her ability only allows her to start with an item, and then after the start of the game, she basically has no ability anymore. So Humble is in the sideboard here, and will bring that in for the heroes where it's actually relevant, and the 2 block doesn't hurt too much, and you'll see that once we go over the matchups later. And that only leaves a couple of cards here.
Yeah, it's Come to Fight, it's a buff. Hits every card in the deck, so it's a nice buff, like instead of Nimblism. It also blocks 3, and it fits the curve. You always stuff for 2 costs. So Come to Fight, a blue, and 2 cost. It's really good. Shakedown for 9 with a Mask on the table. It's really threatening. Or Death Touch for 9 is also just very strong.
Yep.
Put Sawyer's 4s to breakpoints to 7s again. Just an extra card needed to stop that, or another armor block. It's quite valuable.
It also lets you look at the top card of your opponent's deck, so if you're hunting for silver, also a great thing to help you out for that search. Also help you look for your opponent's power cards off the top of the deck.
Yep. This effect will feel familiar if you've ever played Arachne, because it's basically Arachne's hero ability on a card. So it's nice to have access to that reverse opting, essentially, even if you're not playing Arachne in certain situations. This is just, and again, it blocks 3. Can't go wrong with that.
Yeah,
it's a good floor for a card to have, basically. And then the final card that we have in the main board here is Last Ditch Effort.
You're generally trying to get to an end game state, but if other decks are similar, capable to bring you there, Last Ditch Effort is like a safety net of where you can be able to pitch stack 8 go again into 8 go again into something else, or 8 go again into another attack, or isolate swap. It's your last spike turn, and it can be very strong if you are able to keep these into your deck. Blue block 3, so it's fine to block with them, but it's also very good to pitch with them because they reward you later in the game.
One nice little interaction you can have with Last Ditch Effort is if you have one card left in a deck, so your Last Ditch Effort isn't quite active, but you have a silver or 2 still up, what you can do is pitch for the silver to actually draw a card, and then you have no more cards left in your deck, and then you can play the Last Ditch Effort. So it's a way to circumvent this necessity of having no cards left in the deck. If you have some silver, you can pitch into that, draw the remaining cards in your deck, and then that way you can activate your Last Ditch Effort. So it's a neat interaction to keep in mind. If you have a bunch of silver left at the end of the game and nothing really to do with it because your mask is already bought back, you can use that to activate the Last Ditch Effort.
And an important thing to know about Last Ditch Effort, it costs 3, so it's probably the only card in the deck you cannot swap in with Uzuri's hero ability.
Yep.
Since it does specify 2 costs or less.
Yes, that's definitely true. Okay, so that rounds out the main board. Let's go over some of the sideboard choices here. We've already mentioned Humble, and I feel the rest of the deck cards can probably broadly be summarized into aggressive and defensive pieces, essentially. So let's go over some of those.
So I guess you got your defensive package of your D-Reacts. You got Fate for Scene, 0 for 4 opt. It lets you do a lot. It's nice to see what your next card is. If it's not a good card, just chuck it at the bottom. Does the job. Sink Below, same thing. Fixes hands. 0 for 4. Breaks. It just stops break points. You got Frailty Trap. Now this card looks bad, but it has so much more value to it. 0 for 3 doesn't sound as appealing to a 0 for 4, but in the right circumstances and right heroes, this is a 0 for 5, 0 for 6 sometimes. It can be crazy good against Lexi. That's always giving their bow attacks go again, and they're always being played from Arsenal, which hits Frailty. It hits like Dory. It's taking off the counter, taking off damage from it currently if it's got go again, and then also taking another point of value off the second swing if it hits, or if they 20 blade or something. It even hits ninjas if you really need a pinch, stopping their Tadachis. Very good card. Frailties are underrated in Fatigue.
The last hero Ollie didn't mention is Dash.
Dash. Yes.
Dash will be running a lot of pistol parts, which after they give it a go again, if you play Frailty Trap, all their pistol shots will be for 1 less. So.
Yep. I've definitely had that come up where Frailty Trap is a 1 card that saves you like 6 life or something against a Dash. It can be pretty amazing.
And I think your last defensive card is Oasis. This is for your Dominate heroes and your pesky Arcane heroes. And Rosetta Thorn. That does a lot of work in Room Bleeds. Stopping all the damage from the split. Damage from Rosetta Thorn is very nice to use. Gain life is relevant sometimes, especially in the Fatigue, because sometimes you're more likely to be lower in life because you're on the defensive sometimes. So they're hitting you more than you are hitting them.
Absolutely. And then I feel Sigil is kind of a weird card because it could be both classified as defensive and offensive in a way. It's obviously defensive because it allows you to gain health, right? It doesn't hurt the opponent, it heals you. But the way it's kind of a more offensive card is it allows you to gain benefit from having larger hands. So if you're playing against a defensive deck, which won't force you to block with like 2 or 3 cards, you can have sigils to be able to play those additional cards, because Uzuri sometimes has issues utilizing larger hands in some matchups because we don't have access to a lot of go again. So most hands that we're trying to do is like 2 or 3 card plays is typically what you try to aim for, where it's like, okay, I want to swap into something, so I need a stealth card, and then what I want to swap into, and then maybe I can dagger before that, so I need another blue or something, and that's 3 cards. But there's going to be situations where you're left with like 4 cards in hand just because your opponent didn't really do anything on their turn. And then being able to just play a sigil and have that extra 3 life is great. You can put that in your arsenal. It's a great arsenal card. You can just leave it in your arsenal and then replace it whenever you have a leftover card that you want to put in arsenal. You can use it to bait out a command and conquer when they play it, and you're just like, okay, you're about to destroy my arsenal. I'm just going to play the sigil from arsenal, gain 3 health, and then not care about that on effect. It's a pretty versatile card. It doesn't block, which is a little bit of an issue sometimes, but the versatility of the card makes up for it, in our opinion.
It also gets through like split damage or lots of low numbers, like lots of Kodachi for 1. It gets around blocking awkward numbers like that.
And then finally, the last cards we have are the go-agains, so Hurl and Looking for a Scrap.
Yeah, Hurl is a head jab that occasionally can do some tricky things late game and kill their opponent. It's relevant about 10% of the time, maybe.
Yeah, that sounds about right, yeah.
But it's our only source of go-again, really, naturally an assassin. That's fine to play. So just helping extend lines, making 2-card hands, or even in 4-card hands if you want. And then Looking for Scrap fits the curve of 1 blue for a 2 cost, for example. It fits the dagger lines. It also is 5 go again. It's quite big. It's quite a good number. It's like E-Strike, but it also just fits the curve. So you can play more of your hand a bit better. It has niche interactions with your daggers, where if you've hurled to enable it, you can, if you don't use your daggers this game, you can hurl, throw a dagger, then play Looking for Scrap, banishing a dagger. But generally, you're using your stealth cards, your blue stealths. They're all 1 powers, so they're your natural targets to banish, and it's good for just pushing into defensive heroes.
Yep. When you play one of the matchups where you have Looking for a Scrap in the deck, you just try to block with one of your blue stealth cards early in the game, so you have that card in the graveyard, and then you can later use Looking for a Scrap to banish it and turn it on. It's pretty straightforward. The reason why there's only 2 of them in the deck is because you have 9 blue stealth cards, so you don't really want to run 3 because they can cluster up a little bit, and that makes it awkward to play. 2 is generally a good
Flick
idea.
Knives as well, because Flick Knives is in a pinch. If you haven't seen your blues yet, you can still turn it on.
Yep, that's true. And then the last card we have is Remembrance. Again, this is a little more pricey, but we felt that it's good enough for specifically the game plan that the deck is trying to play to be worth including a single copy.
Yeah, the card's great. Shuffle your 3 most powerful cards in the deck back in your deck.
Work towards the fatigue state that we talked about.
Yep.
Yeah, so you're going to be playing this when you're like less than 10 cards, maybe, I think. So you can set up your exact turns you want, and this could be your last touch effort turns, or you can set up isolates into your shakedowns, grab all your shakedowns just to push the damage through. It could be Looking for Scraps, just to go, I need 4-card hands to get through this defense, and Looking for Scrap enables that. So yeah, it's very flexible, does its job. Is a 0 block, can be risky, but the payoff is very strong when it goes.
Generally, you're not trying to play this into every deck. The idea is you play this into the decks where you're really trying to fatigue them, and they might have a chance to fatigue you back. So you're not going to play this into aggressive decks. This is more for the games that might go long naturally. So your Guardians, right? Where they try to do sort of the same thing that you do. So also for the Assassin Mirror.
Or it's if for decks that have tools to access against fatigue decks, so they can have anti-fatigue tech like Briar has, Rites of Replenishment, things like that. And if you can loop a shakedown back just because you know what's in their hand because they've been playing the same turn for 3 turns, you can just go, all right, now we can stop this loop. Done.
Yep. All right, so that rounds out the entirety of the deck. We're just going to quickly go over the matchups a little bit. we went ahead and put those in there. And you're going to see that not every single hero has their own unique matchup in this. The idea was that we try to group similar heroes together, so it's a little bit easier to get the hang of it. And obviously, once you have played the deck for a little bit and you found that certain things work and certain things don't, you can adjust these as you need, and you can just put in what you want to do.
So I think the matchups can be split into 3 groups of how you play the game. And it's fatigue, mid-range, and then your full send aggro. And I think most decks will be mid-range. This will be your Guardians, Azalea, Assassin, Vincent ones. This could be your Rhinas, your Warriors. Then you've got your Fatigues. I think will be Lexia, Ninja, Levia, Riptide, Viscerai, and sometimes Azalea and Assassin, but that's generally mid-range gameplay. And then your full aggro, which is your Dash, your Illusionist, your Wizards. And yeah, I think that's a good way of doing it, of splitting them up into 3. And that'll be the gameplay. The gameplay doesn't change much into every hero, apart from those 3 ways, I guess.
Yep.
It'll be a mix. The mid-range will be a mix of the go again and the defense reactions. The aggro would just be like no defense reactions, aggro package. And then fatigue will be none of the go again, none of the 2 blocks, and just DVX.
That's the general idea there, as Oli has explained, is just see what the enemy is trying to do and then bring in everything that tries to counter that as effective as possible, and then play to the game state that benefits you the most in that specific matchup. He explained it very well, yeah. All right, and then we have a little bit of a upgrade plan for this deck. So if you played this for a little bit, you built it, and you're like, okay, I like this play style. This is something that I want to explore a little more, but I want it to be a little more powered up, basically, right? I want to have a list that runs a little more of the more expensive cards to get the matchups a little bit better. We figured out an idea. We have an idea of what you should upgrade and what order you should upgrade those cards in. So let me just switch to a new copy of this deck. So this is the deck in its current state. And then we have some clues as to what you should upgrade first. So why don't we go over those?
Sure. I think the number 1 first upgrade would be the best card we have access to, which is Codex of Frailty.
Yep.
Card is
Codex of
incredible.
Unfortunately, very expensive, but it is probably the best card that Assassin currently has. Yeah,
you'll notice the power increase with a single card. It's like this is the key card of the deck. This is what made Assassins competitive.
All right, we bring in 3 copies of Codex of Frailty, and then what do we take out for that?
We are cutting the Sigil of Solace from our sideboard and 1 last-ditch effort.
Right, so let's remove that. And then we take out 1 last-ditch effort to bring the entirety still up to 80 cards, so we're legal to play. So we're good to go. And again, it's an expensive card, but you'll notice the impact this has on your matchups immediately. So you don't have to buy them all at once if budget's tight, right? You can buy them individually and just put them into the deck as you go. And every single copy is going to make your deck immediately feel more impactful. That's just how good this card is, specifically for Assassin. You're generally going to want to bring back something that's disruptive for the enemy, so like a Leave No Witnesses. You can bring back a Death Touch. That can be a pretty good play, especially if you go like Dagger, have 1 resource floating, and then you go Codex of Frailty, bring back a Death Touch, play that with the 1 resource in case you just need to kill someone. It's just a very flexible card.
It's also good to use with Come to Fight. You can Come to Fight, Codex, and then any attack, any 2 costs, you can shake down for 9.
Yep.
It's quite nice.
The tokens you also generate from Codex of Frailty are also some of the strongest against some heroes. Plunder will always be strong. Frailty against some heroes can literally change the game.
Frailty into Alexi is never gonna feel bad. It's always at least 2 value, 3 value sometimes. It's generally really good. And you force them to discard too, right? So if they don't have an arsenal yet, they can bring something back, sure, but you can blow that right back up with something like Leave No Witnesses. And then they have to discard a card, so they just down a card effectively, unless they want to block, which costs them 2 cards most likely. So it's just a very good card.
Next up, we have one of the strongest equipment pieces for Assassin, the Black Tech Whispers.
That's a pretty straight replacement. You take out the Snapdragon Scalers, and then you put in Black Tech Whisperers. There's an argument to be made for maybe keeping Snapdragons in the sideboard. There's some matchups where the utility of playing around blocks can be actually pretty good. But I think in the current meta, specifically with Oldhim out of the picture, you probably don't need the Snapdragons anymore, in my opinion.
At least in this kind of list.
Yeah, in this specific, like in a contract heavy list where you can reliably generate enough silver to actually get this back once or twice per game, I think it's probably better than Snapdragons.
Next up, we have the Fennel Spring Tunic, one of the most expensive equipment in the game. 1 resource every 3 turns. Nothing really else to say. Cutting the Hardened Cross Trap. Blocks for 1 in a pinch. It's just 1 resource every turn. Makes your Come to Fights free. Makes your Death Touch technically free.
Yep.
Gives you a resource when you really need it.
In your Fatigue deck, you're going to see that resource quite a lot in a game. You could easily get 3 Tunic triggers, and that's a lot of value over Hardened Cross Trap, for example.
It's very expensive, and unfortunately, it's expensive for a reason. It's just a very good card. We rate it this highly because it really changes the way the deck operates, because the free resource from Fandel Spring Tunic enables a lot of different play lines that you normally wouldn't have access to. It's a deck that generally doesn't need to pitch on any given turn cycle, because your core idea of play a stealth card and then swap that into something doesn't cost anything. And then the core idea of play a 0 cost contract like a Leave No Witnesses or a Plunder the Poor also doesn't cost anything. So both of your core ideas, your core game plans, don't typically involve pitching cards. So being able to just use a Tunic resource for something like a Come to Fight, or for like a Death Touch from Arsenal or something, it just changes the way the deck can operate by making it more efficient. And that's why we rate the Spring Tunic this highly, even though it's one of the most expensive cards you can actually buy. The upside is, once you actually have that Tunic, you can use it for a ton of other decks. It's a very good card. A lot of decks run it. It's not a buy that you're going to regret at any point, even though it is very expensive. It's a very flexible card you can run in a ton of different decks. Okay, what's next on the list?
I think we went for Flick Knives.
Flick Knives, right, yeah.
It's a pretty cheap legendary. It's like $30, right?
Yep.
It enables, again, new lines, which can be very impactful, especially with things like Nerve Scalpel, where you're able to actually stop a D-React from fully covering an attack when needed. It's also just 2 damage sitting on the table, so it puts your opponent at 2 less life as soon as you sit down, potentially, depending on how you block with it. It's also just a 1 block, so it's a straight upgrade to Poison the Tips or any other options. And it also lets you do trickier things later in game, where you can double dagger and then throw a Spider's Bite before the attack to make double Spider's Bites relevant, to like force more cards out of hand or lethal.
Yeah,
it's very good.
You can just kill people with it occasionally, and they have to respect it, right? It's kind of like a reckless swing for Brute, except you don't need to draw it. It does only work once they're at 1, but still, it's a great card. And for the price, it's definitely an upgrade. And you could, if you're strapped for budget, you could buy this before Tunic. Absolutely. We just think that Tunic overall does more for the deck. So we rate it as an upgrade that you should get before Flick Knives if budget isn't an issue. But if you're like, hey, I just want something to power up the deck a little more, but I don't really want to go all in for the Tunic yet, you can also grab a Flick Knives. It's a cheap card, generally like 30 euros or so. So you can just grab that, and you will also feel the impact it has on the deck, because it enables new playlines that you didn't have access before. Okay, and then next up we have a card that just recently got a lot cheaper. which is Surgical Extraction.
I actually just saw the price on this. It's only $10 now.
Yeah, I was surprised.
Very reasonable.
I bought mine for like, I think 35 or something in that price range.
Unfortunately, got mine for like 60 or something ridiculous like that.
Wow. Yeah. Like the spikes in those were real, but it got the reprint in Dusk Till Dawn, so the price dropped a lot. So this is also something that you can pick up for a fairly decent budget. You don't have to go crazy spendy with it. And what are we taking out for those?
The last Elastic Effort and 2 Brutal Assaults.
Yes. All right. Take that out, and then the Brutal Assaults.
Surgical is just what it has the best on hit in the game, right?
Yep. Absolutely.
Take a card out of your opponent's hand and get rid of banish it. Like, it's the silver is sometimes relevant in certain matchups, but it's a little harder to hit. It's 4 power, but with isolates and cut to the chase, you can get around it. It's super impactful when it hits.
Yeah,
you can stop an entire turn sometimes with just hitting the correct card.
And
Turns out Thoughttease is really good.
Yeah, who would have guessed? But unlike Shakedown, you also don't have to call what you want to banish first, right? So you can just look at their hand and then pick whatever it is. Because with Shakedown, sometimes you get these situations where like, damn, I wish I would have called yellow here. Because they have like, I don't know, Rain Razors or a Codex of Frailty or Blood Rush Bellows in hand. And you're like, okay, this next turn's gonna hurt even if I took the red from them. Or they just arsenal their power card. With Surgical Extraction, you don't have that. You just look at their hand, you're like, okay, this is the one that's going to hurt the most, so I'm just taking this away from you. It's a good card. And like we said, it just got cheaper, so great for budget.
Now it's $10. I think it's pretty good.
Yep. It's a little too expensive to put it in the main list, but it's definitely an upgrade that, again, you're going to feel having this in a deck. It's going to do some things. Not as impactful as Codex of Frailty or Tunic or anything, but it's a very good card. Okay, next up, we have one of the unfortunately more expensive ones here. And this is Command and Conquer.
This card is just very good. It's another Arsenal Destruction, but no D-Ranks being played from it is relevant quite a lot. Especially when being swapped in.
Yep.
Sometimes it can be, with an Isolate, you can stop them from reacting with a D-React from hand as well.
Swapping it in with Backstab says you can't play D-React, period.
Yep.
But yeah, there is a trap where they can actually react before it's in play, so they can get the D-React out in time. But it's still a very, very good on hit.
We cut the Amnesia for the Command and Conquer.
Yep. Command and Conquer is just the 3 block, so it does the same thing. And it hits basically everybody that wants to Arsenal, which is almost every hero. And Amnesia is just much more limited. You won't feel bad about buying those Amnesias, though, because there's definitely metas where you can put Amnesia in the sideboard, and it's still a good card.
This can always be in Humble slot. Like, they share the same kind of things.
Yep.
Niche meta targets.
Yep. And Amnesia is a 3 block, so it's never a bad card to put in the deck. Because the floor is just, hey, it blocks 3, and it's a popper against the Illusionist matchup, so definitely a good card to have in your general inventory of cards that you want to bring in at some point. And then the last one that we have is, again, also on the pricier side. This is Enlightened Strike.
What's there not to say about Enlightened Strike? Bottom of the card, choose one of the 3 modes. It's a 2-card hand, it's a 4-card hand, it's a 3-card hand, it's a whatever hand.
Yep.
It's just an amazing card all around.
Yeah, flexible, 3 block.
Yep.
And it's playable in every hand almost, except a 1-card hand, but block with it.
So the thing about Enlightened Strike is, and that's why it's kind of like lower on the upgrade list here, it's never gonna be a card that instantly does something amazing, but it's always gonna be a card that's relevant into everything just because it's so flexible. The flexibility comes at the cost of not being an amazing card overall for each of the modes, but it's also never a bad card to have. You can use it to block, you can use it to extend your turn with a go again, you can use it to just punch in for 7 if you have something already in Arsenal, or you can reset your Arsenal with it. It's just overall, the flexibility is why this card is so good.
The effect of drawing a card is very good, just to keep momentum up.
We cut the Annihilates.
Annihilates those, yeah.
Red
Annihilate. It hurts a little bit to remove one of the contracts from the list, but the added flexibility of Enlightened Strike, coupled with the fact that there's a bunch of decks where Annihilate doesn't really do anything, and it costs 1, is the reason why we decided to remove Annihilate from the list once we bring in the Enlightened Strikes. So we're still at a clean 80 cards here. So this is what the list will look like once you put a bunch of the more expensive upgrades in. And you can kind of see why Uzuri is hard to play on a complete budget, because so many of the cards that you want to have in a deck are so expensive. The upside is a lot of these cards are not specific to Uzuri. So if you have your Final Spring Tunic, Command and Conquer, Enlightened Strike, you can play those in different decks. You don't need to, restrict yourself to playing Assassin. These are cards that are played in a lot of different decks. So once you have those in your inventory, you own those cards, you can expand from there and naturally play other decks, other classes, and not have to worry about buying those expensive generic staples again, because you already have them. The final list
build into different lists.
Yeah.
As well, different versions of Uzuri.
Yes.
If you wanted to explore the many ways of competitively playing her.
Absolutely, yeah. So there's many different Uzuri lists that are competitively viable. This is not the only one. This is essentially a spin-off of Oli's contract Uzuri list, and I'm going to link that in the description of the video as well, so you can see what the, I would say, final evolution of this kind of list could look like. But really, this is a starting point for you to kind of explore deck building and try out different things and just find the list that works the best for you and that you enjoy playing the most. All right. Do you guys have anything to add?
One important thing that you should always keep in mind. Learn the deck that you want to play before you buy the legendaries for it. If you buy the legendaries for it and you don't enjoy playing Flesh and Blood or don't enjoy playing a specific class, do not sink money into it.
Yeah.
$80 or however much the starting cost is going to be, it's a fair assessment on how this deck is going to play.
Yep.
Adding the Final Spring Tunic, Codex, etc., it's just going to be similar to how it plays in the beginning. If you don't enjoy the play pattern of the initial deck, I would recommend trying other heroes. Uzuri isn't the only hero in Fab. That's one of the greatest things about the game. But if you enjoy the play patterns of the budget guide, the fully upgraded guide is just more of the same goodness.
Yep. That's one of the things that we try to keep in mind when making this list, is try to keep the play patterns as close as possible to what the full powered list would play like, while keeping it on a relatively low budget. We went over why it wasn't possible to keep it under, like, let's say, I don't know, $50 or something, because some of the cards that you really need to play Uzuri, they just have a certain price tag, and it's kind of not possible to find budget replacements for them. But we think that this $80-ish budget list is definitely a good starting point for you to start exploring this hero, start seeing what she can do, and then if you like that play style and you like what she does, you can expand the deck, you can upgrade it, and you can keep building this hero and develop your own style of play with her. And she's a fantastic hero to play, extremely fun. And also at the moment in this current meta, I think she's extremely competitively viable, has a lot of good matchups into a wide variety of the field. So she's definitely a good hero to pick up if you enjoy that kind of style. And that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed this budget deck tech guide for Uzuri. If you've got any questions, leave them down in the comments below. You can also find all of us on the Fab TCG Discord. If you have any questions, you can shoot them in there, and see you in the next one.